So the whole complex system is set up right now to just make Pakistan have very, very bad luck in our, so-called climate casino. So they need huge amounts of help. They're suffering, and the rupee is heading to collapse. The economy of the country is heading to collapse. If it takes 6 months for the water to drain away, think of all the diseases that can spread.
To another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. My name's Regina and I'm your host. And today our topic, Pakistan's pluvial plight. Well, by now you've all heard about it. A third of Pakistan, at least, is completely submerged. I mean, this flooding phenomena is absolutely every bit of plight. Now, a lot of people have been saying so many different things. It's an absolute tragedy, and we can't deny that. The flooding is phenomenal. The rapid melt from the Himalayas is incredible. The intersperse of drought versus rain. And of course, we know that dry land cannot absorb water as effectively as moist land can, so that when it finally does rain, it just pools and it just continues and continues. It's almost as if the rain is falling on cement. And add to that the many infrastructure problems that Pakistan has, and it's an absolute nightmare. And this is what we're going to see more and more of in the global South, out and out suffering. There will be those cynics, and they are partly right, that they say, well, it's Pakistan's fault. They haven't invested in infrastructure. I'll give you that, but you need money. You need money in order to invest in infrastructure. And when you're constantly suffering from one climate crisis after another, it's very hard to have this slush fund of money to build up your infrastructure. It wasn't that long ago. As a matter of fact, it was 2010 when there was just another such pluvial plight in Pakistan. So it's been a long series for this country. And this is a humanitarian crisis of extraordinary proportions. There are villages that are now being referred to as islands. Well, let's just face it. Let's just talk about this for a moment. The aid is not getting into Pakistan. There seems to be, in some respects, a lack of will. And in some respects, India is wanting to help, and then Pakistan is sort of balking at that. Just terrible for the ordinary people who are just trying to survive. Let's be honest, for a lot of people, Pakistan's problem is their problem. But let's just say that Pakistan was the world's friend, and they had plenty of money. Even with that, it's just the idea of getting aid through to these isolated hamlets is near impossible. And you have to figure there are not passable roads. So yeah, it's quite a problem. And as I was wanting to say, we're going to see more and more of this as we continue with this climate casino, as Paul likes to refer to it as. And I love that phrase, because as I've said before, and I said it in Glasgow in COP26, the house always wins. Who is the house? The house is the big money people. The house is the fossil fuel industries. They always win. And it's the poor people, the suffering people, the everyday people who always lose. And we're going to see more and more of this, as I've said, and it's very, very sad. And I'm going to pass this on to Peter. I know as a physician, he cares very much about people and suffering. And of course, there's going to be a lot of suffering in terms of diseases that will occur because of this flooding. And I really want to get your perspective, Peter, on what you see in regards to Pakistan.
So yeah, thanks. And thanks to us getting together and addressing this terrible epic disaster. Now, Pakistan has for decades been recognized as one of those most climate change vulnerable countries. It emits 1% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. But with respect to the science, it's been a little bit frustrating because I think most of us thought that the monsoons would get worse. But until very recently, the IPCC and the scientists have not been able to say. They said, we don't know whether it's going to go this way, we don't know whether it's gone that way. So I was very pleased when in April of 2021, a definitive research paper was published. It was a modeling paper, and it was very, very definite. The title of the paper, Robust Increase in Indian Monsoon Rainfall and its Variability Under Future Warming. So the IPCC AR6 picked up on this, and for the first time did come down on the side that, yes, the monsoons get worse in the sense they're going to get heavier, but they're also going to get more erratic. So the monsoon, which has for centuries been the friend of particularly India and China, I don't think Pakistan is really very much into the monsoon region, but has been their friend for predictability, of course, and as everybody knows, producing their crops, their wheat and their rice. But now with climate change, everything's changing, isn't it? It's going in the opposite direction. So this is a fossil fuel, in part fluvial flood of epic proportion. The latest news is that the worst affected areas are, of course, still in a terrible state, but there's going to be even more rain, apparently. Now, the rain in August there was 240% above the average. So a massive, massive increase in the amount of rain. I mean, the monsoon's a heavy rain as it is. So I'm, of course, very interested in food security, always have been. And the latest news is that Pakistan's lost 65% of its main food crops. I mean, that's an absolute catastrophe, including 70% of its rice, which would be its main crop, which has been swept away. They've lost 3 million livestock. I mean, these are statistics of epic, unimaginable proportion, right? I mean, just imagine if anything approaching this happened to where we live. So, as Regina said, apparently a third of the country is still underwater. That, of course, exposes it to all kinds of horrible health effects, which hopefully are being anticipated by the aid. At the latest count, 1,400 people had died. The number, of course, is going up. And 33 million people have been impacted. Now, that's even higher than the 2010 terrible Pakistan floods, in which I think it was 22 million people were impacted. Following the 2010 floods, it took years for Pakistan's agriculture to return. Apparently, it's going to take 6 months for the floodwaters alone to recede on this flood. And a very large amount, according to the authorities there, a very large amount, 40% of their agricultural land has been, for the time being, for the next few years, ruined. Again, one feels terribly, terribly sorry for the people of Pakistan. At the same time, one feels extremely angry at the forces, of course, that are pushing more and more fossil fuels. They've known for years that we have billions of most climate change vulnerable. So this is just one of those crimes of all time, absolutely horrendous crime, which has been pushed onto these people, and it's going to get a lot worse. It's going to get a lot worse for all of us. And so the media have been very good at pointing out, we worldwide should take a lesson from this, because we could be next, we're going to be next in some kind of a climate change disaster, whatever.
Thank you, Peter. I think it's important to know that we'll all be next eventually. And also the importance of having compassion for the people of Pakistan, whether we're next or not. And I thank you for bringing up that point, though. I think it's a very important one. Paul, I would love to hear the science facts from you regarding this pluvial plight in Pakistan.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you, Peter. So going back to 2010, basically an extremely wavy jet stream got stuck over the region. So there was a very deep trough in the jet stream over Pakistan, simultaneously with a very powerful ridge over Russia, Moscow. And it lasted in that persistent stuck pattern. Meteorologists often call it a blocking setup. It's a meteorological term. But what it means is in the trough of the jet stream, the pressure is low and you get lots of storms and excessive amounts of rainfall. And in the ridge of the jet stream, you get very extreme heat, drought, no rain at all. So those things combined, and Pakistan was hit very, very hard. And it took many, many years, as Peter mentioned, even for the agriculture to recover. If you look at crop yields and agricultural production, huge dip in 2010, and then it took many years to increase. And the drought and heat wave in Moscow meant that they didn't export wheat and other grains that year. They had to use it all themselves, and that contributed to spiking food prices, leading to Arab Spring. So just for context, you know, the planet is connected. I mean, what was happening in Pakistan was the flooding and storms. And, you know, I heard numbers like half the country underwater and stuff, but those numbers depends on who's saying them and how they're calculated. And, you know, this flood seems to be worse, and they're saying that 1/3 of the country is underwater this time. Now, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited the stricken regions in Pakistan recently, and I just want to give a quote. He said, "I've seen many humanitarian disasters in the world, but I have never seen climate carnage on this scale." And he talked about supercharged storms. He talked about all of the extreme weather events, and he tied it directly and said, this is because of fossil fuels. Now, his pronunciation was fossil fools, not fossil fuels. I don't know if that was intentional or not. But in terms of justice, Pakistan is paying the price. It's, as Peter mentioned, it's kind of in the bullseye for climate change, especially with those staggering losses to food and the food problem. Also, you know, the scale is enormous, and it's making the country poor. I mean, it's impoverishing the entire country. This year, 2022, the rupee, Pakistan currency, has dropped 30% against the US dollar. Now, in terms of climate justice, Pakistan has contributed roughly 5.2 billion tons of CO2 between 1850 and 2020. To put that in context, that's roughly what the US emits every single year. Okay, so, you know, Peter mentioned 1% of emissions. I mean, they're being hit hard, and they had a minimal role in the problem. The World Bank says that Pakistan can soon face macroeconomic instability. They could have currency collapse. You know, it can get a lot worse. I mean, their economy is teetering on the brink. I mean, what country can withstand 30% of their land being flooded and the loss of so many crops? And it's not a rich country to begin with. So there is a huge danger that it collapses and causes global repercussions to the economic system. And clearly, climate change has accelerated, and the consequences are far worse than any predictions, with the exception of, you know, Peter and myself and a handful of other people's predictions, right? We've been trying to yell from rooftops about how serious this problem is. You know, we've been doing this for many years, and now we're right there in the soup. Just another quick stat on infrastructure. I mean, the roads, the rail, villages. I mean, there's huge lakes appearing. People don't even know where their village is in some cases. You know, there's like 15, 20 feet of water covering where it used to be. And there weren't very many tall buildings that are poking out of that water. But these massive floods have partially or fully destroyed over 18,590 schools in Pakistan, and that affects over 670,000 students. So when you do that to a country, there's enormous long-term effects. I mean, your population loses so much education, loses so much learning, and that really hampers the ability of the country to pull themselves out of a disaster like this.
Thank you for sharing so many facets of this tragedy, Paul. I mentioned earlier that Pakistan's refusing aid from India. You know, we need a united human race in order to combat this disaster we call climate change. I have such a hard time wondering if humanity can really rally together to save ourselves. And this whole notion of being underwater, a huge portion of country being underwater for months, as you both mentioned, how could any country survive that economically? And then when I look at the economics of it, a lot of people in Pakistan are speaking to the aid and how, you know, they're looking at this as climate reparations for the harm that has been done to their country by the global north. And, you know, there's something to this. They, as we stated, they have contributed so little to climate change, to emissions, and yet they're suffering so much. I forgot who it was who said it in Pakistan, but he had said something to the effect of, the comfortable lives that you're all living in the global north are why we're all underwater here in Pakistan. And you can't deny the truth in that. Peter, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, actually, I'm just going to go back to that paper and that model, because I forgot to say something which is terribly important, particularly to all this area, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. And the thing is this, on the model, the increase in the monsoon driven by climate change starts around 2000. That's interesting. Around now, that increase, the model projects this rapidly accelerating increase right through to 2050, 2100, increasing very, very fast. The science, of course, is really important, is very interesting. That's why we're all involved in this. But we're not getting any response, are we? You know, we're not getting any response from our leaders, from our leading institutions. I mean, you know, the science is crying out, right? Catastrophe, catastrophe, catastrophe. So this is going to be the plight of all these millions and millions and millions of people in this region who, as I said in the past, depended on the monsoon and now are going to get increasingly trashed by the monsoon.
Thank you so much for sharing your views on that, Peter. And I'd love to hear more from you, Paul.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't get away from the hard physics of the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, which is basically that for every degree Celsius rise in temperature in the air can hold about 7% more water vapor. The global rise has been 1.2 or 1.3, depending on who you listen to and what baseline you pick. But over land, it's about double that. And actually over mountainous regions, it's about double that again. So some mountain regions are warming at about 4 times the rate of the global average. So rivers were very, very swollen to begin with in the north of Pakistan, you know, rivers that were feeding meltwater from the Himalayas into the country. But the monsoon rainfall, 240% higher for August, as Peter already cited. I mean, these numbers are just off the charts. I mean, they're very hard for a country to deal with that. I mean, how does a country mitigate that? I mean, if Pakistan had unlimited money, which they don't, what could they do to prevent a recurrence of such a thing? And it's very difficult to answer that question. I mean, there's lots of things that maybe you could try if you had lots of money, dredge all the rivers, create huge channels, try to sacrifice or triage certain areas that were less population dense, so the water could go there. But you're fighting gravity. I mean, the water falls on the ground and it runs to the lowest spot. So if there's underground aquifers that you could create conduits to, massive drilling equipment, like, I don't know. I mean, as engineers should be trying to figure out, how is this country just destined to have these floods repeatedly? And, maybe not. I mean, we're going through abrupt climate change. The patterns are shifting, very, very rapidly. We're on this upward curve, and we're also in a La Nina year for the third year in a row, part of the ENSO or El Nino Southern Oscillation patterns. And that sets up more rainfall in certain parts of the planet and less rainfall in other parts. So that's contributing to Pakistan's woes right now. One thing that is very difficult to say is, I've talked about weather whiplashing. When there's a massive flood and much of the country is underwater, people then assume, okay, this is going to happen again in a few years, and it's going to happen again. We're very, we think like that when something, but there is a lot of fluctuation. Like after 2010, there were a number of years that were very low rainfall, in Pakistan. So you have to remember the overall climate system is changing. The way heat is distributed on the planet is changing. That's changing the jet streams. It's changing the ocean currents. So the whole complex system is set up right now to just make Pakistan have very, very bad luck in our so-called climate casino. So they need huge amounts of help. They're suffering, and the rupee is heading to collapse. The economy of the country is heading to collapse. If it takes 6 months for the water to drain away, think of all the diseases that can spread. And we did a video a while back. We talked about the atmospheric rivers creating perhaps a huge lake in the Central Valley of California, submerging Sacramento, hitting the breadbasket of the US, water taking 6 months to a year to dry out. This happened in 1862 or 1864 or something. If something like that was to happen today in the US, that would be kind of analogous to what's happening in Pakistan right now, I think.
And that's something that I just can't imagine. We had Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and it rained over Houston for days. We also had Hurricane Sandy in the East Coast here, but we've never had anything on the scale of Pakistan. And the idea of waiting 6 months for the entirety of the water to subside is something that it's incomprehensible. You brought up an interesting point regarding, is this going to keep happening? Will this happen more often? How often will this happen? But if it continues and continues at a scale like this, people are going to pick up stakes and leave. We're going to have climate migration, and we're going to have to think about how we will react to this. Do we want peace? If so, how do we generate it? How do we cultivate it? We can't be naive, but we also have to have an intention to work through this together as one humanity. This is the challenge of our lifetime. And I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you for deliberating these very difficult questions that are of utmost importance. Please leave your comments in the comments down below. How do you feel about climate migrants coming into where you live? What are your thoughts about this? We'd really like to hear it. And what are your thoughts about Pakistan? And the future of that whole region in terms of flooding. In addition to leaving your comments, we would love for you to like, share, and subscribe. Like this video so that people can see more of our videos. This is how YouTube works. Share the video so that people can learn more about the devastation of climate change. And subscribe so that you'll be aware of when we have a new video coming out. And we make our very best effort to have one coming out every week. And we'd like to see you then on the next Climate Emergency Forum.